Hello, I'm David Hunt. My guest today is somebody that I've known for far too long, but we've all got a cross to bear, and this is mine in life. He's a great person, very well known in Melbourne and in Adelaide. He was born in Adelaide, that's how I know him. We'll get to that a little bit later. He's known to a lot of people as Father Tony Noble, and here in Victoria in particular, he's known for his amazing work that he did at St. Mark's for 18 years in Fitzroy, which we'll get to that a little bit later. And then after those 18 years in Fitzroy, he headed OS to America and spent 8 years in San Diego as the parish priest there. Tony Noble, hello.
Hello, David Hunt.
Now, when did we meet? How old were we about when we met?
You were 15 and I was 18, so we've known each other for 55 years.
And the reason being?
We were both mad Port Adelaide Football Club supporters, as you had to be in the area we grew up in, and I had started a cheer squad for Port Adelaide and you joined.
That's right. And we had far too much fun. It was just the most amazing thing, the amount of friends that we made through that. Now, the one thing that, as history has now shown us, is that you're very much an organiser. You organised that cheer squad and you had a band of people, well over 100 people that were part of that cheer squad in those crazy days in the 60s. Obviously, you've gone forward in your life where you've ended up being a priest and an extraordinary life there. What did you see in yourself back then as a kid? Give us a bit of a picture of you as a kid growing up in Semaphore, South Australia.
I went to Everton Primary School and I remember there was
a very rough school.
Well, not when I was there. Yeah. There's a bit Port Adelaide, and we had a gang, of course, innocent gang, no drugs or anything like that. And I was the second in charge. So I guess I was always destined to be some sort of leader from the time I was a kid. And I transferred that into my life when I left school, and I've been a great organiser ever since. Starting with myself, I have to say.
Now, the interesting side of it, as you was at school and then for the few years after school as well, you were involved in athletics. What did you do in athletics?
I was a long-distance runner and I really enjoyed athletics, partly because of the individuality of it and being able to achieve something by yourself. I suppose that says something about me, I don't know. But what I really excelled at was walking, distance walking, which is a very difficult thing to do. It looks crazy. And, of course, it's not a very big thing. Most people think of things like you did, if I remember right.
I was a hurdler, yeah. But religion always played a very big part in your life, Tony, didn't it? You had the cheer squad, which was a part of a religion for you. But going to organise religion, as in a church, you were heavily involved in your church in Port Adelaide. Why?
It's a very good question. I suppose I came from a typical Anglican family. My parents didn't go to church. I was sent to Sunday school. I sang in the choir when I was 12 or 13 in the church. But my father was very big on education, so I was banned from going to church when I was in high school. I had to do my homework on Sunday mornings. So reverse psychology, as soon as I left school, I started to go to Mass on Sunday. And I guess something caught, and then I just progressed, and I was involved at St. Paul's, Port Adelaide as a young man, and it was a wonderful community. And I suppose one of the things that I think is important about church is being part of a caring and loving community. And not everyone experiences that, but I certainly did.
You went overseas, as so many young Australians did back in that era, and you were in England, London. You were there for a few years.
I was there for a year and a half. It was the greatest time of my life. I was 27 when I went, and it was just a typical Australian working holiday. So I went with a mate and we travelled around Europe in a little old Volkswagen. Then I got back to London. I had no money, so I had to get a job. And I lived in London. I lived in amazing places, West Kensington, Pimlico. I had met great people through my work. I tried to avoid Australians. I really wanted to experience England as a person who got to know the people who lived there. And it was a wonderful time in my life, and that's why I keep going back there now.
You come back to Australia, and all of a sudden you think you get a calling to go into the priesthood. Tell us about that experience. Where did an angel come down from the heavens and shine a light over you and say, Tony Noble, I have a mission for you, and you'd be part of God's family?
Not exactly, David. It actually happened when I was in London, and it was really it was out of the blue, and it was not what I was looking for or searching, because I was living in a nice little flat in Pimlico. I had a nice job. I was seeing the world. I was in a relationship, and there's an Anglican shrine in England called Walsingham, which is a shrine for both honouring the Virgin Mary and for healing. And I went there a couple of times, and then I went there on a sort of a retreat for a couple of days, and I suddenly got this idea about being a priest, and I thought it was crazy because it was going to turn my life upside down. So I sought the advice of my local priest, and I said, I've got this feeling, what should I do? And he said, pray about it. And I went home and thought, well, that was the stupidest advice I've ever heard. I wanted something a bit more than that. Anyway, I did pray about it, and the more I thought about it, I kept on thinking, what would my life be if I was a priest? What would I be doing now? And in the end, I decided to go back to Australia to see if going home would change my mind or whether I would pursue it. And so subsequently, I did go into seminary. Didn't find that easy, but I persevered, and then I was ordained.
You actually had a couple of parishes in Adelaide. More so, your own parish was it Elizabeth?
You're quite right. When you're first ordained, of course, you're an assistant. So I was an assistant in Woodville Garden, a rough area, for a year. Then I went to Campbelltown in Adelaide for 2 years. And then I was asked to go to this, it was like a mission hall. It wasn't a proper church, in Elizabeth, where a lot of the 10-pound poms lived. And the Archbishop told me I was going there to see if the parish could be saved, and if I couldn't do anything about it, it would be closed in 6 months. Well, that just excited me to have such a challenge, and I loved it. I loved the people, and I loved the challenge, and I built it up fairly quickly, and was very happy there for 3.5 years.
How did from 3.5 years, and you were happy there, why did you want to come to Melbourne, and what was the draw card to come to Melbourne?
I suppose I've always thought of Melbourne as a great place to come and live without any consideration about being a priest. When I first started work, every long weekend I would come over to Melbourne for a long weekend and have a great time driving all the way from Adelaide and then back. And I always loved Melbourne, and particularly for the football, but also it was just a lovely city. And although I really loved growing up in Adelaide and appreciate everything about that, to come to Melbourne was a bit of a dream, really. And so when I got this invitation to be interviewed, I thought, wow. And I had to think a bit about it. But once I was interviewed, I thought, yes, I want to go there.
In St. Mark's in Fitzroy, it's a legendary church that you made it legendary pretty much in the last 20-odd years. What was it like when you first got there? There was a soup kitchen as part next door to the church. The church hall had a soup kitchen that fed the homeless that we all know that live in the Collingwood Fitzroy area, that live on the street, I should say. What was it like being part of this parish that was supporting people way back then? We accept homeless people now, but back then it wasn't as well known, was it?
It was 1985 when I went to Fitzroy. It's a long time ago, and things were definitely different. For a start, the church had a better reputation then. But what excited me about St. Mark's was that they did have this outreach in the community for people who were in rooming houses or in some cases lived on the streets. wasn't the big problem it is now, but it was still a problem. And I
Yep.
sort of admired this church that had a parish with just 30 people trying to run this drop-in centre with meals and food parcels and a day centre. And I thought, yes, it's a challenge I wanted. And again, like Elizabeth, some people thought the church should be closed down and should just be a welfare centre like, say, the Brotherhood of St Lawrence. But I was keen to have my finger in both the parish and the welfare work.
Over your time there, and you really built up the congregation and I used to even go there when I moved to Melbourne, which wasn't all that long after you moved to Melbourne, and I got heavily involved in your parish because old friends, and you started to do something very special around World AIDS Day. Tell us about that.
Well, yes, that's another story. Again, something I wasn't searching for. But what happened was after I'd been at St Mark's about a year, one of the newer members of the congregation, a nice guy, came to the vicarage door and said he wanted to talk to me. So we came down to the kitchen with coffee and he told me that he had HIV. And this was my first direct interaction with someone who had HIV. And we talked a lot about it. And the main thing was he wanted to know if he could still keep coming to church. I thought it was a terrible thing to have to ask, but of course he could come to church. The fact that he felt that maybe he couldn't. But of course, you may remember at that time some clergy, I remember there was a Baptist minister who said AIDS was God's judgment, which I thought was the most unchristian thing I'd ever heard. And so when I was confronted with this situation, I thought, I have to take a stand here. I have to be prepared to accept people who have HIV and do something so they do feel absolutely welcome and part of it. And from then on, I became really convinced that I had a particular ministry without knowing what it was. So I went to the parish council, they're called vestries in the Anglican Church, and I put to them that I felt we should be involved with AIDS work. Now, of course, at that time, the Victorian AIDS Council was the big organisation, and they had moved to premises in Collingwood about this time. So about half a dozen of us from the parish council were quite supportive. There were a few gay people in the congregation, and they were very determined that we ought to do something. So a few of us went along to the VAC induction courses. And I felt at that time that St Mark's couldn't do anything that was not involved with VAC, that it would be pointless doing something to rival whatever was being done by the Victorian AIDS Council. So we just went along and decided to get involved in the local community group and to if you like, to walk alongside people with HIV.
And therefore you started welcoming people to your parish. You had a very big gay and lesbian community within your parish. But then on World AIDS Day, the masses, Tony, turned into one of the big events because there weren't a lot of celebrations or a mass like you started doing on World AIDS Day, to the extent where the church was like overflowing and there were people, just as many people outside as there was inside for these masses. It must have been so rewarding for you, the response you got, and the fact that it was a way for people with HIV or people that had lost friends to actually come and not celebrate, of course not celebrate, but had like a reason to come to church on that day.
Well, again, that was something that just happened. In 1987, I took a month's leave on top of my annual holiday, so it was actually 8 weeks, to go to America. I wanted to see what the church was doing in America because there wasn't much happening in Australia. So I was sponsored by an Episcopal parish, that's the Anglican Church in the USA, in San Francisco, to see what they were doing. And I went to New York and I went to this amazing, it was an AIDS Requiem Mass. So it was a Requiem Mass for people who died of AIDS. And it was an amazing service. They had a huge choir, sang one of those old Latin masses, and the church was packed and they read out all these names. So I came back to the parish and I said, I've wondered what we could do at St Mark's that was our particular offering, and this is what it was. It took about a year to organise. I had a very good music director, and he got a choir from the Melbourne University Choral Society to come and sing. And we had liturgical dance, and that was a particular thing I wanted to do, having liturgical dance. And we had people from the AIDS Council come and read out the names. And the first one was 1989, and we got about 150. In those days, our congregation was 50, so that was pretty good for us. But the thing was, the following week afterwards, I got all these phone calls from people saying, I heard that you had a special service of people who died of AIDS. When's the next one? And I said, well, it'll be next year. And it just developed from there. And once people heard, people would just come. And it wasn't a dreary requiem mass, so to speak. It was a celebration of people's lives and of those they'd lost. And I got so many nice letters saying it was wonderful to be able to celebrate lives that have been looked upon with disdain. The fun thing was, though, of course, I had to advertise it, and I would go around to all the bars and the places where gay people would go, putting up posters. And the first year it was all a bit strange advertising a church service. The second year, when I would go to the people would say, "Oh, I've heard of you." So I guess I got a reputation.
Brilliant. So what did the hierarchy of the church think about what you were doing?
Hard to know. I mean, St Mark's was always on the edge of the diocese anyway, in terms of how they looked at us. They would often refer to that church that has gay people. Of course, we had gay people. We had all sorts of people. It was Fitzroy. But the first year I had it, I wanted priests to come dressed as priests in case anyone coming to the service wanted to talk to a priest. Hardly any of them that I approached wanted to come because it was a hot potato. It was too difficult. The second year, people started to come, but the great thing was when I got my bishop, Andrew Curnow, who was very supportive, and he came and presided at the service, and from then on, different people would acknowledge what we did, and the hierarchy, although sometimes they found it all a bit difficult, were very supportive in the end. But the first few years, it was all me doing the hard work with my people.
You did a lot of fundraising there, which I got involved in because I love a fundraiser and I love a party that's usually thrown around fundraising. And the spire there of the church was decaying because it's a very old, beautiful old church. So a lot of the fundraising was for that and for your soup kitchen as well. So therefore you did some amazing things. Why did you leave, Tony? 18 years. Why would you leave a church where you were doing so many wonderful things?
That's a good question. In the Anglican Church, a vicar in Melbourne stays 10 years, and if he stays 10 years, then he has to be renewed by both the parish and the diocese. And that happens then every 5 years. So in my 15th year, I was renewed for the second time, and it became clear to me that 20 years is a long time in a parish. In fact, 5 years is a long time these days. And I had a long talk with my bishop in my 17th year, and he said, well, you can't stay at St Mark's forever. Would have been nice, but I accepted the fact that you can't. It's just, eventually you have to move on and let someone else follow you and provide a different slant. So I thought about that, and then out of the blue came an invitation to go to San Diego.
San Diego? Like moving a whole country and to America. I thought maybe England, but San Diego. Tell us, what was that like? And what was the congregation like?
I first went to America, as I mentioned, to look at what the church was doing for AIDS work in 1987. That was my first visit to the States, and I fell in love with America, and I met wonderful people, and I admired the Episcopal Church, which is a bit more liberal than the Anglican Church of Australia. Anyway, after that first visit, I then went to America every year, usually for a vacation, but it would also involve preaching and getting to visit parishes. And as a result, I was at a conference in 2002, speaking at a conference in San Diego, and there were some people from this church in San Diego, a traditional Anglo-Catholic parish like St Mark's, who were looking for a new priest. And I was invited to go to this meeting, and I thought it was very strange to have priests go to a meeting, sort of put your hand up for a job like you were in the public service. I thought it was odd, but I went along out of interest. Anyway, To cut a long story short, we had to say why we wanted to go to San Diego. And I said, I'm not the least bit interested in going to your church. I said, I have a wonderful parish back in Melbourne. I just thought I'd see how you do the process there. Well, that caught the attention of these two men, and they kept on pursuing me. And it really was 6 months before I eventually felt that God was calling me, A, to leave St. Mark's, and B, to go to San Diego. It was a wonderful parish, but like both Elizabeth Downs and Fitzroy, it was a parish on hard times. They had lost people and they wanted someone to build it up. And so once again, a familiar challenge, but a different thing. I had to learn a whole new culture, really. And that was exciting because previously I'd been a visitor and now I was going to actually live there and work there. And it was a wonderful 8 years and the people were wonderful. I just loved it.
So tell us, how hard was it to leave St. Mark's after all what you had done there, and you became so well known? People knew you down the street, and you and myself used to go to the footy together to see Collingwood, and we'd walk from your place to the Victoria Park. Uprooting yourself to, yes, the wonderful challenge to live in another country, but it must have been a little bit hard in a way as well.
Well, it was, but after 18 years, I just felt, like I really should move on for the sake of the people, because I'm not the only priest in the world, and perhaps they needed someone new and different. And, I went there in my 30s and I was now in my 50s. So they were the significant time in my life. But the challenge and the opportunity to go to America, which is very rare for Australians, I just felt was wonderful. And I did feel called. I did feel a definite call. And when you're a priest, that has to be the overriding thing. Is this what God wants me to do? And there was, at the same time, the exciting challenge of having to learn and adapt and try not to make too many mistakes.
So you did a remarkable job. You turned the parish around, and you again had a lot of gay and lesbian people that came to church, but also a lot of families that had fallen by the wayside in that parish. Tony, you must be very proud of yourself, what you have achieved as a priest, and each parish you've been to, you've just built it up to a major little church.
I can't quite work out how I've been successful in worldly terms, except that I believe in what I'm doing. I'm a very outgoing person. People always say that when they come to the church for the first time, they felt welcomed, and they would call me the smiling priest.
I'm going to push you a little bit here. Like you were doing the World's AIDS Masses in Melbourne, and you had a following of the gay and lesbian community, likewise in San Diego. Are you gay?
Yes, I am.
How hard was that, being part of religion that really back in that era, didn't openly embrace a gay priest?
That was a big question, and when I felt called, I had to consider that, because I'd come in, when I was a young man, I'd come across a negative attitude from both priests and people in the church, and to me it was what I was. But sometimes you have to think, well, if I want to be a priest, maybe I have to live a different sort of a life. And then I realized that that's ridiculous, because God called me as I was. He called Tony Nova, he didn't call someone else, and that everything about me was being called. And I went to two priests I got to know in London who were both gay, who led very disciplined lives. They were great examples to me. And then I thought, well, if a gay person can't be a priest, then a gay person can't be anything, because gay right's all about everything in the world being open to gay and lesbian people.
Isn't it part of the Anglican Church that you, back in that era, that you weren't allowed to be gay?
Well, no. In fact, the Anglican Church has always had gay priests, even gay bishops, and certainly my tradition has always been what they call high church, or we prefer Anglo-Catholic. So it's a great emphasis on ritual and worship and tradition and good music and regular offering of the Mass, all those sort of Catholic devotions. And those sort of Anglican parishes tend to attract gay people, and there's a number of reasons for that. I think partly because it's such an embracing form of a parish, whereas the more narrow-minded ones tend to want everyone to be the same.
It's good that you didn't let that get in the way of your career and your calling, and you were the perfect person in that situation. The question I want to ask you now is that, like what you did at St. Mark's and what you did in San Diego, all of a sudden walking away from it, and at the end of San Diego, you retired. Is that right? And what is it like, like sort of now being just an everyday person instead of a priest, in inverted commas, where you are looked at it quite differently than other people?
It's not easy to retire from any job, but particularly if you're a vicar or a rector, you're not only the kingpin, so to speak, everything hangs on you, but the way you live and what you do determines whether the church is successful or not, grows or declines. And so to have that taken away from you, that is the position of being the vicar, is not easy. But I found it very easy because I wanted to retire. I wanted to come back to Melbourne. And when I prayed about it and thought about it and talked about it with people, it seemed what I wanted to do. It's a different life for me now. I'm very much retired.
You're a retired person that travels the world, and which this virus is killing you because you can't be traveling the world. But your salvation is AFL football. Now, we grew up following Port Adelaide in Adelaide, and then the move to Melbourne, and we followed Collingwood because they were black and white and the same as Port Adelaide and Adelaide. But then when Port Powell became part of the AFL, you very much swung back to Port Adelaide, and you're still passionate about football. And if you could, but you're not allowed to leave Victoria right now, you would be following Port Adelaide, all their matches, which you normally do.
I just love the football, and I have to admit that one of the reasons why I returned to Australia when I decided to retire in San Diego was because I missed the football. When you're a priest, you have to give up things like being able to go to the football, though that never stopped me, of course. But when going to America meant that I was missing the football, and so one of the reasons I came back was so I could follow Port Adelaide, and I do go back to Adelaide when I'm in Melbourne during the football season for the home games, and it's the club I grew up with, like you, and I just love it. And I always say it's the other religion.
It is a religion. Also, when you were at St. Mark's and we used to go to the football together every Saturday, because it would be every Saturday back in those days, if people came to you and they wanted to get married, you would say, "Oh, not in football season." You're like, "I don't marry people in football season." Is that true?
It's sort of true. If they were parishioners, that is, if they actually came to the church, I would marry them during the season, but not in September, and certainly not on Grand Final Day. And there was a very famous occasion, you might remember the 1990 Grand Final, which Collingwood won, of course, was held in October because there was a draw in the finals. And I got a phone call from The Age, I think, asking me as a priest, did I have any weddings on the weekend that the grand final was being played? And I said, well, I never have weddings on the day of the grand final. I also don't have them on the week after in case it's a draw.
What is it about you that you want to travel the world so much? Well, you spend most of your year flying somewhere, living in hotels. What is it, Tony, about your life as a traveller?
In this lockdown, I'm reflecting a lot on my life. When I went to high school, I learned German, and I had this wonderful teacher from Munich who not only taught the language, but she taught me to appreciate the culture. And so I had this thing about Germany, and because I'm so old, at that time the Berlin Wall went up, it's 1962, and I was fascinated by the history of Germany, which was so evil under the Nazis. Anyway, so when I always had this concept of a world other than Adelaide, I suppose, in my mind. And the second thing is, my life has always been separation. When I was 7, we moved from Salisbury, which was a country town, to Semaphore. And then my mother died when I was 18. So again, there was a separation in the family. My brother, my father and I, we really went our separate ways. And then, of course, I went on the working holiday to when I was 27 to London and travelled around Europe twice and loved it all. So I've always been a person who just loves travelling. I always joke the first overseas trip I did was to Kangaroo Island. I won a trip to Kangaroo Island when I was 12. That was my first. So it's Kangaroo Island's fault. But I just love travel and I've been able to do it. And I'm very fortunate and blessed that I can do this. And that's what I do in my retirement.
Now, you mentioned your brother. You had a really good relationship with him, but you weren't as close as you could or you should have been. He was also gay, and unfortunately, he died of AIDS. You actually reflected on him just the other day with me, saying, "Oh, I thought in our retirement that we would become a lot closer." What was it like, one, having a brother that was also gay, and the fact that you weren't all that close because you were running in, like in very different directions, weren't you? What you were doing in life?
There was the usual sibling rivalry when we were young. And then when I was 18, my brother was 16, our mother died, and my brother and I went our separate ways, and our father got remarried. So we, by default, we just became different. We lived different lives. I was very interested in sport and then church, whereas they were not of interest to my brother. He became a very well-known interior decorator in Adelaide and was very successful in what he did. When I became ordained, he was rather bemused about that. He thought that was rather interesting. And there was always this thought in my mind that, okay, we were going our separate ways. And then I moved to Melbourne, of course, where we saw less of each other. And I thought, well, when we retire, we'll be able to reconnect. And unfortunately, he did catch HIV and he died in his early 40s. And so the lesson from that is never put off something. I mean, I wish I'd thought about that at the time, but always act on things. Don't leave them too long.
Mm. Is there one thing left in life that you really want to achieve that you haven't achieved?
I want to see another Port Adelaide premiership.
It might be this year or it might not be this year as well. Because you're not one of those people that plan your life that much that you think, I want to do this, I'm going to do that. Like situations have come your way and you then grasp them. Is that true about you? Is that what you're like?
Yeah, that's true, David. I'm very content living here back in Melbourne, and I have a wonderful life and friends like you that I socialise with, and of course I'm missing that at the moment. And I have the football, and I have a list of places to visit still with my travels overseas and going back to America. I still go back to America to see people there. But apart from anything more to achieve, unfortunately I can look back on 40 years in the church and before that.
You live here in St Kilda, and so do I. And we have got the Victorian Pride Centre being built. It's out the front of my apartment. What does that mean to you? What is a Pride Centre of this extent, this spectacular building that's being built here in St Kilda with government-funded money? What do you look, like, considering how much work you put into the community back when you were at St Mark's? What does it mean to you that we've come this far, that this amazing centre is being built?
I think it's wonderful. It's a tribute to our government. I remember when I first went to San Francisco, seeing the big centre they had there on Market Street and thinking it'd be wonderful to have something like that in Melbourne. And it's now happened. I'm just, I'm so old these days. I wish I was still at St Mark's in my 30s and early 40s to be involved as I was with the VAC back in those days. It's great for the young ones, how times have changed for all of us, that the young people now have a place to go where they can feel embraced and welcome and not have to hide themselves.
But don't you think it's also going to be a centre for older people as well? I think it's going to embrace all generations, because all the organisations that are going to be there are like coming from all walks of life. It's not just yes, it's wonderful for young people now that they can be so out, but there must be so many closeted older people or people that don't really have a group of friends in the gay or lesbian or bi community, that this is going to be their place, their centre.
You're quite right, of course. I mean, it's going to have everything there to serve the whole of the gay community, not just the young ones who need a place to go.
Thank you, Tony Noble from Semaphore, Adelaide, South Australia. It's been wonderful chatting with you today. And I'll see you around the corner in St Kilda within the next couple of days. Thank you so much for doing this today, Tony.
Thank you, David, my oldest friend.